Great. Can everybody see that? Yeah, Jillian, does that look okay?
Yep.
Okay, I'll turn it over to you. And then also at the end, we're just going to go through a really short presentation and then we'll be here to answer questions. And there's just a few of us, so we'll have plenty of time to do that. Go ahead, Jillian.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So, as Lily said, I'm Jillian Zeiger, and I'm in the Community Development Agency's Housing and Federal Grants Division, and I'm going to give a really short presentation about the Priority Sites Program, and then we are going to open it up for questions. So, first, next slide. So the Priority Sites Program is a program that is sponsored through our regional government, the Association of Bay Area Governments, also known as ABAG. And the priority sites are locally identified, so they would be nominated by the county jurisdiction, and they're regionally significant, able to support homes affordable to all, and near essential services, so green spaces and things like grocery stores and public transit. And one of the advantages of these funds is that they are funds for technical assistance and pre-development, as well as infrastructure funding. So right now, ABAG, the regional government, has $28 million for the entire region, so the 9 Bay Area counties, in pre-development funding, and that would be the first tranche of funding. So pre-development could include something like a lease negotiation, preparations of requests for proposals for developers or site owners, as well as site design process. ABAG has also told us that these funds could be used for infrastructure. So they're going to have a pool of funds for infrastructure, and that could include money for roads and transportation, utilities like sewer and sanitation, potentially childcare services, and school or recreational facilities. It also will make tailored technical assistance available, and this could include outreach, site studies, and areas that need subject matter experts like site remediation. Next. So ABAG, the regional government, is very explicit about what sites could qualify for a priority sites program. So one bucket is regionally significant sites. So sites that we have in the unincorporated county that we have planned for 500 or more homes, and ABAG considers those regionally significant. The second category is community anchor, and this is a plan for 100 plus homes and also 10,000 square feet or more of civic, cultural, or community facilities. And this could include a community center. It could include indoor or outdoor recreational spaces, trails, gardens, open space to be used by the public, clinics, grocery stores, etc. So really that community anchor with 100 plus homes. And then finally, a public site. So these are sites owned by a public organization, whether that is the county or the state, with a total of 200 plus homes. And the catch is it needs to be multiple parcels. So it can't just be one parcel. It's a conglomeration of parcels. So if a local jurisdiction meets one of the criteria above, the site must also be located in a Plan Bay Area 2050 area or a transportation priority area. Next slide.
Sorry, I'm having a little glitch.
It's okay.
Bear with me. Okay.
So staff saw that this program, the Priority Sites program, was available, and we thought, why should Marin participate? It would allow more opportunities for outreach and planning on sites in the housing element. As some of you may know, the sites in the housing element are under ministerial review, and that means that the sites are under staff level review. They wouldn't have public hearings, and it's really limited opportunities. So we thought it could be an opportunity to do more outreach and planning and pre-development on some of the sites we have in the housing element. We're also looking to these infrastructure funds that ABAG has told us about. And these are funds that we could use for site cleanup and infrastructure like roads and schools, etc. We heard a lot during the housing element about the need for better circulation and the need for more amenities, etc. And the funds, if any sites are nominated, the funds could be used to support that. And finally, it helps achieve our regional housing needs allocation, also known as our RHNA. That's a term we used a lot in our housing element outreach, but that's the number of units that the state has mandated that Marin County unincorporated county build, and that's 3,569 units. But generally, it helps us achieve this, and it helps us build more affordable homes in the county, which is the intention of the housing element, and it's the intention of RHNA. So next slide.
1 minute.
Okay. While it's pulling up, we looked at our housing element sites in unincorporated county, and the map on the right is our housing element sites. And as you may remember, previously in the presentation, we talked about the sites would have to meet the requirements necessary for the ABAG priority sites program. So all of the sites that you see here are sites in our certified housing element, and they also meet the requirements necessary for ABAG's priority site program and have needs that align with the program funds. So all of these sites and all of the units in this presentation are also sites and units in our certified housing element. Next slide. So the next steps are the priority sites application is due on September 30th. That's why we wanted to have a conversation with the public. And then if we were to nominate sites, we would hear back from ABAG late 2023. Just wanted to clarify that if priority sites are designated, additional outreach will be conducted in advance of grant applications to ABAG. The priority sites, by applying and being designated as a priority site, you're not signing a grant application, and you're not, promising anything to ABAG. You're just letting them know that these sites, you're interested in nominating them, and they have a certain number of units on them that are in your housing element or your zoning code. So if we designated priority sites, we would then have to go through another round and apply for grants. And all of the grant applications will be presented to the Board of Supervisors if we nominate priority sites for consideration prior to application submission. So this first round and what we described in this presentation today is about nominating priority sites in our housing element that would sit in this pool. And then if the county chooses, if the Board of Supervisors acts on it, then we would be allowed to apply for more grant funding or any grant funding associated with these sites. So with that being said, we want to give some time for questions. So let me
before we go into the questions, I just wanted to ask you ask a few points of clarification.
Sure.
So you said that this was in the unincorporated part of the county. We're here tonight to talk about the unincorporated, but this could also apply in cities and towns. Is that right?
Yes. And preliminarily, I've had discussions with a couple of cities and towns. They haven't nominated priority sites, but I know that some of the cities and towns are also interested. So
okay.
Yeah.
And also there hasn't been any decision made about whether at this point whether to apply and which sites would be included. Is that right?
Correct.
And then one final question, and then we'll, sorry, go to everybody else. It's also, I think that just for us all to make the point of clarification, this is to support units have already and sites that have already been designated in the housing element, and we're not proposing any additional units on the sites that we were talking about. So that process has already been discussed and designated through the housing element.
Correct. And ABAG is asking in the application for zoning and housing element documents. They're not asking for any rezoning or any changes in units on the sites.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. Let's see if there's any questions or
so if
feedback.
You have questions, you could put it in the chat, or you could use the raise hand feature.
Yeah. It looks like Bill Nichols has the first one.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill McNicholas. I'm the chairman of Clean Up Marinwood Plaza Now Oversight Committee. And two of the sites, Marinwood Plaza for 125 units and St. Vincent for 680. Are you planning to go in and expedite the cleanup? Because they're toxic waste sites right now. And it looks like the program's going to be about another 5 years before the state program gets these sites hopefully cleaned up. I have been on this program since 2012 when Supervisor Sue Adams and the Regional Water Quality Control Board District 2 said the site was cleaned up. But I got with a new project manager and we found out no, it wasn't. There was a PCE going clear over, and the last I've known is over 3,000 feet into St. Vincent's and Silvera Ranch. The site at Marinwood, yes, they're making progress, but we're still looking at like 5 years before that will be ready. Is this something that fits in, or is an immediate program?
So I think that the question in there, thank you, Mr. McNichols, for that comment, and thanks for your work on working on a cleanup. So I think, Jillian, the question is, would supporting the cleanup be part of could that be covered through these funds? And is that an eligible use for funding if it was applied for and awarded for this program?
Yes, that would be an eligible use of funds. We've asked ABAG if a priority site was nominated, if remediation and cleanup would be an eligible use, and they have said that it's an eligible use.
Follow-up question. Does that mean they'll do it immediately, or they want to program and work through the site for another 5 or 6 years as projected in the remedial action plan of the Regional Quality Control Board?
I don't think anything would be immediate, because as we've said, the sites have not yet been identified. If they were, there would need to be a funding application. So it may, if this was selected, it may be a faster timeline than the 5 years you're talking about, but definitely not immediate. Because as Jillian noted, if this is nominated, then to apply for the funds, we would need to go to the Board of Supervisors and have another public process. So this is just kind of raising your hand saying, yeah, we've identified housing on these sites, and this is somewhere where we may need some additional dollars to support it. We're going to go to Sandra next.
Thank you. I have 3 questions. One is, I just want to confirm that the only projects eligible for ABAG money are large projects. If there's a small project, that would not qualify. Is that correct?
That's correct under this program, yes.
Okay. And of the sites that have been identified by the county, are there any quote infill sites, or is it all just big projects?
Well, I think that those are not mutually exclusive. I'm not sure how you're defining infill, but an infill can be a larger project. I'm not sure how you're defining
So, for
infill.
example, if there was a smaller lot, because I specifically am interested in doing something that would provide housing for a small number of senior people, as part of the opportunities we have right now, and whether that be like 6 or 8 or 10 or 12, but not this massive development.
Yeah, so for this program, this is specifically focused on larger development opportunities throughout the Bay Area. There's other funding sources, and if you're interested in talking to us, I'll make sure that we put our email in the chat, and you can reach us and we can talk to you about other funding opportunities for smaller projects, but this one specifically is tailored for larger ones.
Okay, and my final question is, are these sites that have been identified, are 100% of them specified for rentals, or are some percentage of these specified for housing where people could actually get an equity position in housing?
So in the housing element, we look at housing at all, kind of housing that can serve all income levels. And we don't mandate whether it's rental or ownership, typically to be affordable at the lower income levels. Those are typically rentals, although not always. I noticed that we have Pam Dorr from CLAM, who works at a local land trust, and they do affordable home ownership. So yes, you can do affordable home ownership. That it's possible. But when we're talking about zoning and the number of units, that's just the number of units. We're not mandating the type of development that the property owner and the developer that they worked with would really determine that.
Okay, thank you.
We have a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay, great. Do you want to?
I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up. So this first question is, what's the difference between priority development areas and priority sites? And I can start answering this question. So priority development areas are geographic areas that are nominated by a jurisdiction. I believe they have to be nominated with a resolution as well as a scope of work. And the priority development areas are nominated so that they can fund things like a specific plan for the area. And when you nominate a priority development area, you have to act on it immediately. Whereas the priority sites program is specific sites that are locally nominated. And they would go into a pool, and then the jurisdiction, meaning the Board of Supervisors, would have to act on a grant application. So a simpler way of saying that is the priority development areas are much larger and they have a one-step process. The priority sites are specific sites, specific parcels or groups of parcels, and it's a two-step process. The first step is, do you want to nominate these sites in order to be able to receive grant funding in the future? And then the second step is, there's grant funding related to infrastructure, or there's grant funding related to planning and pre-development. And then in that subsequent step, we would go to the Board of Supervisors and come with a resolution provided by ABAG for those grant funds in order to apply and accept the grant funds.
I just would add one thing to that. Thank you, Jillian, is that I think the priority development areas are really where you're saying we intend to add additional housing than what's already planned here, and we need help in planning for that additional housing. The priority sites, we've already done that planning, and we're not planning for any additional housing. That's already been designated, and that process has already happened to the housing element. So I think that that's really one of the other distinctions, is that priority development areas, and it's a little unfortunate that they sound almost the same, because how confusing is that? But that means you're like planning for more housing, and the other one is like you've already planned for it, and what do you need to help make it happen?
Okay. The next question is from Mary Pepper. Who will select the areas for the ABAG funding? How can community input happen in only 10 days? And on the map, is Tamales there? Writing is small.
Do you want me to start with that one, Jillian?
Yeah.
Okay, so the sites have already been, so all of these sites have already been selected through the long community process that we went through with the housing element for several years. So they've already, like, the zoning is already in place. The board has already selected these when they adopted our housing element. And so that process has been done. And so the number of homes on each of these sites has already, that process has already happened. So how the sites will be selected, we are going to hear you tonight. We're evaluating it, and staff would submit that application by the end of the month. Unfortunately, it is a short turnaround, but no funds there, no final decision would be made until there was funds, the board applied for those funds. So that would happen after the first of the year, when we would actually apply for funds.
So,
And then, sorry, let me just
okay,
finish,
sure.
sorry.
Thank you.
And then is Tamales there? No, Tamales there's a site in Tamales, but it's not, which the map that Jillian showed was all of our housing element sites that were already selected and are included in our certified housing element, but those are not eligible for this priority sites possible funding program that we're talking about tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Can you hear me? All right.
Yes,
Oh,
sure, go
perfect.
ahead.
Thank you. So Tamales was on that map. I understand the housing element, and I thank you for all the work and the clarity you've given on that. But I guess my question is, like, when these like, I know Tamales won't be one of them because we're way too small, but when these groups are selected for the ABAG funding that you're going to submit by on the 30th, will there be an opportunity there for communities to have a conversation or give feedback or say, oh, could you include us? Or, I'm just wondering what's happening in that step between now and the submission, or maybe the communities already know that they've been selected to be in this.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So these sites have already been selected for housing when the board adopted the housing element in January after we went through about a year and a half process. So it's, I really want to make it clear, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but there's no additional housing that is planned through identifying these as priority sites. This is really about implementing the housing element that was adopted by the board and certified by the state. And so this is saying we plan for a significant amount of housing on these sites, and they're going to need some extra support to make that happen. And so this is intended to say, when future money comes available, planning dollars, infrastructure support to support roads and schools and those kind of things, we want to make sure that we're in line for it. And then when those actual funding applications come out, they're going to say any priority sites are eligible to apply for funds, and then we would bring those applications to the Board of Supervisors. And so that is where additional outreach would be done, and there would be time in front of the Board of Supervisors. Bill, we'll come back to you, but we want to make sure that we get to the other questions that are in the chat and to people who haven't asked questions yet. So Jillian, did we get all the questions in the chat?
We have a couple more. First is, what is CDA's view of 2 Jeanette Prandy Way site for priority site eligibility? I can start. There are not enough units on that site in order to qualify for nomination for a priority site. The next question is, will the county's planning commission have an opportunity to weigh in on what priority sites to include in submission to ABAG.
So this, as I said, and here I go, I'm going to be a stuck record again, like housing, these are already designated for housing. The Planning Commission had a lengthy process and was involved in that. And so they, we had multiple workshops and hearings in front of the Board and Planning Commission. And so that process has already been decided. This is really intended to say, as I said, like housing has already been designated here, and how are we going to make it happen? So a funding thing is not something that goes in front of the Planning Commission. Funding decisions are made by the Board of Supervisors. So after these sites are designated, if there's funding applications that come in front of us, those would go to the Board of Supervisors, not the Planning Commission, because this is not, the Planning Commission is really about changes to zoning or to land use, and that's where they weigh in, but the funding side of it is the Board of Supervisors. So no, they wouldn't, the Planning Commission would not be weighing in on this.
We don't have any more questions in the chat, but I do want to say that I put my email in the chat. I'll do so again at the end. And I also put a link to our housing element. Some people had questions about what sites are in the housing element, if they're sites in their community, etc. And our housing element website has a nice table of all of the sites in the county. So I'll just put that back again towards the end. We don't have any more questions in the chat.
We do have I know that we have let's make sure that we go to anybody who hasn't asked a question, and then we'll come to Mr. McNichols and to Ms. Powers, but let's make sure if there's anybody is there anybody who has not asked a question, who had something that they wanted to do? Let's just take a minute. It doesn't look like it. Okay.
There's a question in the chat, Lily,
okay.
From Jack Crystal. And I can answer this. He asked, can I submit a 10-acre on Richardson Bay for housing? For the priority sites program, we have to nominate sites that are in our housing element or zoned for over 100 units. And if this is, related to a development proposal, then I suggest that you have a meeting with our current planning division. And just once I put my email up there, you can send me an email and I'm happy to link you to that.
Right. Let's go to Bill, and then we'll go to Kate. Go ahead, Bill.
Thanks, Lily. Couple questions going into it. Has there been anything concerned about the infrastructure? You're looking at St. Vincent, 680 homes, another 125 at Marinwood Plaza. The water, since hell, we'd only have a 2-year supply here in Marin Municipal, and we're going to be adding another, I don't know, as I seem to think, 14,000 for the county. And what about electricity? We already have brownouts. Can we handle it? Has anything been done in qualifying these sites and this expansion? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So that, I think, is really a question about the selection of the sites in the housing element, and less a question about the designation of them as priority sites. I will answer it, but I just want to make the distinction that identifying any sites as a priority site is not adding any development capacity that isn't already there. That said, one of the values of the priority sites is, in addition to the planning dollars that Jillian mentioned and that additional community input and process, the other thing is that this identifying sites as priority sites helps identifying them as priority sites helps put them in line for future infrastructure support. And so when you talked about the infrastructure needs at St. Vincent's, for example, that could include, and water, which is definitely obviously something that is concerning to all of us and that we're thinking about, especially at this time of year when it's so dry and it's smoky and there's fires, is that how can we make sure that we're utilizing our water in the most efficient way? And one infrastructure support that could help with a project like that is looking at purple pipes, for example, so that you're doing a better job of using recycled water.
Fucking job.
And that is something,
Pardon my
I'm
French.
sorry, can I answer your question?
go
and
ahead.
Not interrupt you? Thank you. You know, that's the type of infrastructure improvement that could be supported through this. So that supporting the infrastructure needs, whether they're schools or roads or water issues, is something that that identifying them as priority sites could assist them with. We're gonna go to Kate now.
Thank you. I live in San Rafael, North San Rafael, where the Northgate Mall is being proposed, and that went through a priority development areas submission, and then it was accepted by ABAG, and then a proposal for a grant was put through, and the city did not receive money for specific planning then. And then a project was proposed, is going through the planning process now with the city. And the city just recently did receive in the second round money for a specific plan, but the project is pretty far along in terms of its planning process. So am a proponent of keeping some of the open space like St. Vincent, Silvera, to the extent that there's not as much infrastructure there yet, and these planning grants don't always line up when a project starts to happen, the community really doesn't understand how the traffic and some of the other things the capacity is going to be accommodated, for example, at Northgate, because there's no specific plan. So with St. Vincent Silvera, I was just wondering, is there when this county proposes priority sites, are they in competition with each other to be identified as a priority site? And would there be a reason to, just with the sequencing, propose sites that are infill already or in areas that infrastructure has capacity to accommodate them? I guess I wasn't very specific, but if you know what I mean.
So let me make sure that we're answering your question. So is your question, if the city is identifying priority sites and the county is, whether it's a competition process? So I think for that, the answer is no. What they're trying to do is identify what are all of those larger sites that are going to that meet the criteria. When the dollars actually come available that we talked about that happening next year, that would be a competitive process, and that would be a different process, right? Like this is just saying like, yeah, these are the big sites that we think meet your criteria that you've identified. I think that they would like every site that met their criteria to say, yes, this is one of them, right? So it's not like some would be included and some wouldn't, if I understand it. Is that correct, Jillian?
Yeah, so in terms of nominating the priority sites, as long as they meet all of the requirements that I mentioned in the presentation around, 100 units plus community facilities, etc., then they would be in this larger pool. And then, as you were saying, like, applying for a specific plan grant, but in this case, it would be pre-development funding or infrastructure funding. Then, there's only $28 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but for the 9 Bay Area counties would,
nothing.
Need to be spent. So, the competitive aspect would take place when grant applications are submitted, and depending on the funds available and the number of applications.
Could I just follow up with one follow-up?
Sure.
Is there any downside to being a priority site? Because I'm wondering if it wasn't a downside of being identified by ABAG as a priority development area during the last RENA and not really having a specific plan in place before the development was. So I'm just wondering if there's any downsides to being identified as a priority site from the county's perspective. And then I'll mute.
we don't, at this point, we have not been able to identify that. We have worked with staff, we've read all the documents, and the other jurisdictions that we've talked to have really said the same thing, that it's really just consistent with your housing element, and you've already identified that the housing is going to be there, and that this is really intended to support that. So we don't see any tie with it other than, I think, I mean, people may kind of assume that it's the same as a priority development area, which I think, there could be, we probably need to do more outreach and explain that difference. But I think that is most likely the main concern that we have, is that there just is a kind of a misunderstanding of it. I don't know, Jillian, would you
Just
add
to
anything?
Yeah, just to add that priority sites just put you in a pool for grant funding, and then the grant itself would have potentially strings attached to it. But we find that because the application is just asking for existing planning documentation, they really want to know, what do you have planned for these sites, and are they in need of the pre-development or infrastructure funding? So they're kind of doing a needs assessment. And I think, they're asking for locally identified sites, so that it's not ABAG saying, okay, these are all the sites, in all of the different jurisdictions, because they're not on the ground and they don't have a full understanding of the sites. So yeah, I think it's ABAG's way of giving back some local control and allowing jurisdictions to nominate sites.
I'll come right back to you, Bill. Was there? No, I
I have a
thought that
couple
Lori
of
had a
comments
question.
for you, Lily.
Okay.
One, where are we getting the water and where are we getting the electricity to cover this 14,000 unit development in Marin? Hell, the Marin Water District is talking they just raised the rates. They're talking years in there, getting their act together to try to get it up to a 4-year based on the current population. The electricity, according to PG&E, is looking at brownouts for the next years because they don't have the system to handle it. So what is in the program that will take care of these requirements for another 14,000 housing units?
So again, those are really questions around the housing element. The housing element is the process where we went through, and as you know, it's a state requirement that every community in the state, every city, town, and county plan for new housing. There was questions that we asked along the way, if there's water limitations, if there's other infrastructure limitations, are those reasons not to plan for your share of identified housing? And the answer is no. And that has been consistent throughout the state. So, what you need to do is say how you're going to address those needs. And, we have done that to the best of our knowledge in the housing element, the best of our ability to say, here are the water constraints that we have. Here are the other infrastructure constraints we have. Those were also evaluated in our environmental review when we planned for the additional housing in the housing element. And there's more information about each of those infrastructure needs in the housing element. I think that I can talk about them in a general way, but really to get more specific, I would point you there, and I'm happy to provide you more information about that from what is described in the housing element.
Would appreciate it, but I think the people in Sacramento are saying we're demanding and we don't give a damn about Marin or anywhere else. You guys make it happen. And I really don't want to live through more droughts, military showers of 1 minute, and all the stuff, and electricity and blackouts, and having a generator here to take care of things.
I hear you.
That's why California is going to be losing 4 more congressional districts.
You know what? I'm sorry, Bill, that's a little bit off the
people are living.
topic. that's a little bit off the topic and we have some other
Yeah, but
questions. I
that's
want to make
true.
sure that we get to those. Thank you.
Okay, go Lily.
All right, thank you. Jillian, you want to do the other
Okay.
questions in the chat?
Yes, so Kelby Jones asks, when will the list of priority site nominations be final and available to the public? I can start. So staff are here tonight to answer questions. We're also available. We're getting emails and phone calls about this. And then if staff choose to nominate the sites, they will be made available to the public on the priority site nomination website, which I can also include a link to.
And we'll also send out a email blast to anyone who participated here and to our other list. I think we have your emails from tonight, but if not, make sure that you give us your emails and we'll make sure that we let you know. But we'll also send out an email blast to everybody that has subscribed to the page. There's another question. Let me just read it to you.
Sure.
Could you explain minimum density versus unit capacity in the housing element? Sandra would like to know.
Okay. And it might be maximum density, but okay. I will.
Maybe it's maximum.
Yeah.
Sandra, is that, did you mean?
Maximum? Okay.
Yeah, maximum.
Okay. So I
great.
thought.
Typo,
Okay.
sorry.
Sorry.
So we have unit capacity in the housing element. So for example, if we have a site in the housing element that has 100 units, so the capacity that we are showing in our development code at our countywide plan is that it's zoned at X units an acre, and we have done the calculation. So let's say it's 10 units an acre and it's 100 units. Versus maximum density would come into play if the developer or applicant would like to use density bonus. So density bonus is a state law that developers use sometimes to get to make changes to our development code. It's sometimes called a concession. So if they want less parking or a different setback on the building, or they could potentially ask for more units, and the more affordable developments usually receive a higher density bonus. So the long way of what I'm trying to say is that unit capacity in the housing element includes our zoning, but it doesn't include density bonus, which is a state law that changes on, I wouldn't say monthly, but it feels like that, on a yearly basis.
So I'm looking at the plan and there's one parcel that shows a unit capacity of 58 and a maximum density of 30. Based on what you just said, I would expect that to be the opposite. The maximum density would be.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting into the nitty gritty a little bit here, Sandra, and I'm happy to walk you through that. I'm going to put my email here, but yeah, I'm really happy to, because some of our sites, just generally, some of our sites in the housing element have like 30 units an acre, but it's restricted to a certain number of acres in order to have a certain unit capacity. So something might be 30 units an acre, but I'm only seeing 10 units, and that's because the site isn't an acre. It's a third of an acre.
Got it.
So,
Yeah,
but I'm happy to answer any other specific questions that you have.
And then there's a question from Mary Pepper about who is nominating sites for as priority sites. So I would say that, first of all, these sites have already been identified for housing through our housing element process, and that was done through a long community process and was adopted by the board in January. And at this point, we're staff would be making that, not that just the nomination, and that would be the community development agency staff. And then, as Jillian mentioned earlier, when funding is actually available after the new year, then it would be the Board of Supervisors who was the final decision maker on whether to apply for those funds for specific sites. So that process, there would be outreach, et cetera, when that happens after the new year.
Thank you.
Any
Sorry, I
other
didn't-
questions? We got a few more minutes if,
I don't see anything in the chat. I'm just
Okay.
going to put our housing element website in here again. This has all of our housing element documents, including the environmental review and our sites list. And then I'm also just going to put my email here. It's jziger@marincounty.org if you have any additional questions.
Well, I have one more quick question. Could you be, if you have a big project area, could you apply to be a priority site even if you're already in a priority development area? Sorry to keep going back to that, but I'm just wondering if you know the answer to that.
Yeah, so let me give a little more detail and you can tell me if this makes sense. So a site is in the priority development area. It's in the PDA and there's a site. So let's say there's a priority development area and there's a site within it that's zoned for 500 units. Yes, it could be designated as a priority site. It doesn't, it can be in a PDA. It doesn't have to be in a PDA. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
all right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. I also want to thank you for your really good, oops, sorry, there's some noise in my kitchen. Some really your good questions. I think that this was really helpful. And we're available if you have other things come up. And I think that what we wanted to say is make sure that people understand kind of what this is and what it isn't. And that, this is just the first step in a process if it goes forward. So, and there isn't any decisions that have been made at this point. So we're exploring it right now. And we also are sorry that it's so late. We should have been doing this probably several months ago. It would have been better, but it's where we're at. So we'll do our best with what we have. And please, if you have other questions that come up, please feel free to reach out. Sandra, I think that you'll reach out to us to talk more about other funding opportunities for smaller projects that you might work on. And yeah, we're happy to answer any questions that come up along the way.
Thank you for a very informative presentation. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being here.